Welcome, everyone, to the Week 11 Waiver Wire Show presented by the 33rd Team. I am your host, as always, Josh Larky, joined, as always, by the Associate Director of Fantasy and Betting, Ryan Reynolds. Today, we're going to walk through the top ads for the week on the Waiver Wire. Then we're going to discuss some general fantasy risers and fallers. Maybe we could think of these as some players to potentially trade for in a way. And we will end the show with quarterback, tight end, and defense streamers for week 11. Let's dive right on into it. Devin Singletary had 30 carries, 150 yards, and a touchdown on Sunday. I think there's some chance he's the lead back when Dameon Pierce returns. With the Texans sneakily gearing up, maybe, for a playoff run, Singletary is the guy that has the experience. He was pretty competent with Buffalo those past couple years down the stretch run. The Houston run game's been pretty bad all year, but I think the pass attack might start to elevate kind of everything about this offense. I would lean towards Singletary as the 1A, Pierce 1B rest of season, but that might be an overreaction. Ryan, how are you seeing this one?
No, I think that's a fair take. The one pushback I'll give is I was above consensus on Singletary last week. I told a lot of people to play him in start situations. So I think last week might be a bit of an anomaly from a production standpoint. That said, I'm willing to bet on him now to at least have the lead in this backfield where maybe it gets better in the second half of the season.
Yeah, I think if you need running back help, I think I'd go up to 20-25%. The reason I wouldn't go higher is just because this run game hasn't been good all year. And I think anytime they're both healthy, it's some kind of committee. That's sort of how I'm viewing this. Is that where you'd kind of be at with Singletary, as 10 to 20%, depending?
Yeah, I mean, we're also late in the year now, so we don't want to leave and exit the season with any fab bucks left. So be aggressive if you need someone.
Ty Chandler, this is my favorite out of the week if you want a 1 week rental, potentially more. Alexander Madison's concussed. I don't see how he's playing this upcoming week. Only Brock Purdy has cleared concussion protocols in the same week, and he plays quarterback. That's pretty different. Ty Chandler gets the Denver Broncos this upcoming week, the worst run defense in the NFL, and the Broncos just played on Monday night. So even though they play on Sunday night, it'll still be a 6-day short week for them. I think Chandler has a pretty obvious 100 rushing yard upside. I'll definitely be looking at his props when they come out. This is an extremely fast guy. And when you look at the rest of the backfield, Kene Nwangwu is mostly a special teamer. I'm not sure if they try to elevate somebody else for this game, but I think Chandler's getting you 15 to 20 touches.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you've said this, Josh. Backup running backs often get huge workloads, even more than the starters sometimes in these situations. Chandler's definitely a more explosive player than Madison. And like you said, if you're playing the Broncos, you want to run on them. Their secondary is the strength of the defense. I still don't quite understand why this is the Sunday night game, though. Weird correlation, Broncos-Vikings.
Yeah, it's a little bit strange. One thing I'll also add is I think Chandler has a little bit of an audition to be the lead back, just like Singletary might be the lead back over Pierce. I don't think that would be crazy with Madison. I wrote an article on Sunday detailing some of the usage, and essentially Alexander Madison has not scored a touchdown despite nearly 10 goal line carries this year. His catch rate is about 20% lower than the average running back because of how many drops he has this year. There's pretty much nothing in Madison's profile that suggests that he has like a clear grip on this backfield. Speaking of backfields without clear pecking orders, let's talk about the Ravens. Keaton Mitchell keeps surging. He had the 100-yard day 2 weeks ago. And then even though he only had a few touches last week, they were actually more than Justice Hill. So he's gone above Justice Hill already. Gus Edwards, he is the goal line back. I don't think anything outside of a Gus Edwards injury will change that. He's got maybe 60, 70 pounds on Keaton Mitchell. That's not an exaggeration. They look nothing alike. So I think unless Gus Edwards gets hurt, the ceiling's a little bit capped. But what are we thinking, Ryan? Like 10 to 15 touches is what you're hoping for from Keaton Mitchell each week between the 20s?
How I see this basically is Keaton Mitchell is essentially like Jerome Ford is in Cleveland. He's a fast guy behind a good offensive line. Like you said with Gus Edwards, I think he's more reliable. And the thing that's most important for the Ravens is let's not get Lamar Jackson killed. So I do think Mitchell's usage is going to rise from here. But like you said, I think Gus Edwards is the guy. And for Mitchell to truly be playable, Edwards needs to miss time.
Let's talk about Josh Dobbs. At least 25 fantasy points both games with the Vikings. The quarterback 7 in fantasy points per game since week 2. I think we should treat him kind of like Sam Howell rest of season. These are kind of the two out of nowhere guys that have a little bit of mobility, have a little bit of moxie, and are just kind of churning out these mid to low end fantasy QB1 performances week after week. I'll have my rest of season rankings on the site tomorrow, late afternoon. I might put Dobbs ahead of Sam Howell even, simply because of the rushing ability. Only Lamar Jackson has more rushing yards. Does it sound crazy if I told you Josh Dobbs QB10 rest of season?
No, I mean, let me say this, Josh. Back in week 2, we talked about this. I said, I think Josh Dobbs is going to be a guy who signs a 3-year deal for $30 million as a long-term back for someone. I think we're going in a different direction now where he's probably going to start next year. So I don't think that's crazy, especially with his rushing upside, especially when Justin Jefferson returns. I'd still view him as more of a streamer where you want to pair him with someone else. But, you know this, Josh. I play on Mojo. I just put $1,000 on Josh Dobbs recently. So I'm significantly in on Dobbs as a Viking going forward.
I like that. Yeah, that's another thing is that if he's already been very, very fantasy relevant and now he's about to get a top 3 skill player in the NFL, just gift wrapped and handed to him for this offense, good things. Let's turn to the receiver position. We should have to get his name out. I don't think either of us like him that much. Demario Douglas, he has at least 6 targets in 4 straight games. The average depth of targets around 5-6 yards. That's kind of like what Wan'Dale Robinson was prior to the quarterback injuries in New York. The past 4 weeks, he's had between 8 and 14 PPR fantasy points. You might say, oh, he's got a lot of targets. The touchdowns will come. Generally, touchdowns don't come when you're getting short depth of targets on a bad offense. I think Demario Douglas is a bye-week fill-in. I wouldn't bid more than 5 to 10% fab. I do not see anyone winning fantasy championships because of Demario Douglas, but now we have gotten that out of the way. Ryan, anything to add before we move on to, I think, a much more exciting high upside receiver?
No, I think you nailed that. I literally have nothing else to say. See it exactly the same way.
Noah Brown's a lot more exciting. At least 5 targets in all 4 games since he returned from injured reserve. The past 2 weeks, 6 catches for 153 yards and then 7 catches for 172 yards. The target depth has been pretty high. I think he's earned the ability to keep Robert Woods off the field in 3 receiver sets the rest of this year. I think the upside here is fantasy wide receiver 3, even without injuries. And I think anytime Nico Collins or Tank Dell would miss a game, then I think we just kind of have to start Noah Brown as a top 25 weekly option. You've watched every snap of every game since 2014. Does he look as good on film as these eye-popping numbers do?
No, I mean, what I would say is maybe this is second half AFC version of Puka Nacua, smart, reliable player with a high-performing quarterback and a pass-centric offense. Against zone, you don't necessarily need to be a dynamic athlete to beat it. You just need to be smart. You need to be running the right route against the right defense. So I wouldn't expect this production spike to, continue here. Same with Puka, but he is a very usable guy going forward. It's fascinating. It really is.
Guys, that is Ryan Reynolds NFL on Twitter. Make sure you're following him. Make sure you check out his Survivor thoughts on Mondays on the site and his power rankings, which came out today. They come out every Thursday. Noah Brown, former Cowboy. Brandon Cooks, current Cowboy. Brandon Cooks, he had 7 targets in week 3. Every other week, he had 4 or fewer heading into this past Sunday. And then all of a sudden, target shares at 23%. The Cowboys have just been passing more. He catches 9 of 10 for 173 yards and a touchdown. I'm trying to figure out what to do with him. I obviously liked this performance from my best ball teams that have been hurting because he hasn't done much. But I think he's still kind of the co-number 2 with Jake Ferguson. Is that sort of where you're at? Or do you think that there's more potential for the veteran?
No, I think that's interesting. I mean, a lot of this stuff's going to be matchup based. Dallas plays Carolina this week and Washington on Thanksgiving. The Washington game's interesting in particular. I don't think he's going to be reliable, but now that we've seen a massive spike week, I could see a few more coming on the horizon.
Yeah. One thing to note, he's scored 3 touchdowns the past 4 weeks. That's unlikely to continue. But again, we like to make bets on offenses. The Cowboys are pretty good pass attack to bet on. Deonta Foreman, some people out there might dislike that because he's not available in their leagues, but I think he's going to get dropped in a lot of formats because Khalil Herbert's returning. Only one Chicago running back has reached 20 carries this season, and it's been Deonta Foreman each of the past 2 weeks. At least 20 carries, at least 80 rushing yards. I'm just not sure if Khalil Herbert's going to be the lead back. at least for week 11, I actually have Foreman ranked ahead of Herbert. I think he'll be the lead back for this first week for fantasy football. It's a very tough one for me to figure out, but I think Foreman's done enough, if that makes sense, to keep it for at least this week.
Yeah, I mean, I could even see them splitting carries. Foreman's a perfect bear, physical, tough runner. He was very productive as a Panther last year, too. So I could see it being a split. I'm not looking to drop him either right now.
Rashid Shaheed. Saints are on bye. This guy's going to be so cheap on waivers. Michael Thomas has the multi-week knee injury. I say multi-week because that's what's been reported. If you told me he never plays another snap of football the rest of his career, that also wouldn't particularly surprise me. Shaheed had a season-high 23% target share this past week without Michael Thomas. 9 targets. He caught 5 for 24 yards. I think that's perfect because a lot of people aren't looking at targets like we are, and they just see, no, he had 24 yards. That's not exciting. We know Shaheed has game-breaking speed. If he's getting 9 targets every week, he's a fantasy wide receiver too. I don't think that's what he's going to be. I don't think he's getting 9 targets a week, but knowing that that is possible for him is very exciting to me.
One thing I'll add here is if Derek Carr misses even a game, we already saw that Jameis Winston still doesn't care about throwing interceptions. He'll give guys opportunities. And to the Michael Thomas point, he looked pretty washed the last few weeks too. So I don't even if he comes back, I don't think he's going to be a big factor. I think Shaheed's behind Olave and Alvin Kamara in this passing attack going forward.
Michael Wilson. Some people are very excited about Michael Wilson. I can't quite get on board, but we should talk about him. He hasn't reached a 20% target share in a game this year. He's in 2 receiver sets with Kyler Murray, but it's Marquise Brown and Trey McBride ahead of him. I'm not sold. Are you able to sell me, or should we just say that this is a player best left for your league mates to pick up?
No, I'm with you all the way. I don't think he's a dynamic talent of any kind. You know, his association with Kyler Murray is the only reason I even know his name right now.
Well said. Let's talk about some risers and fallers, and we'll start with Kyler Murray. Ryan, Kyler Murray returns this past week from injury, 249 passing yards, 6 carries, 33 rushing yards, and a touchdown on the ground. Watson has reached the 249 passing yards Kyler Murray did just once this year. So is Kyler Murray what we wanted Deshaun Watson to be for fantasy football?
Oh, what a great question. I love that, Josh. Kyler Murray gets a lot of flack, but I think it was 2 years ago. The Cardinals were 8-0 and Kyler Murray was in the front of the MVP race. That's his ceiling. One of the best quarterbacks in the league, dynamic athlete. I couldn't believe how explosive and evasive he was in his first game back. So clearly they waited for him to have no limitations. So my answer is yes. I think he is what we wanted Deshaun Watson to be.
Yeah, I think so too. My rest of season rankings hit the site tomorrow. Kyler Murray is going to be a massive riser. That one run from Murray where he kind of like spins around and then scrambles outright for the first down for like 15 yards.
Yeah.
I didn't look at next gen stats, but that would not surprise me if that was the fastest quarterback run of the year. In terms of his top speed that he reached at one point, I was like, oh my goodness. Kyler Murray is definitively 100% healthy.
Yeah, I think there's maybe 5 guys in the history of the world that could have pulled that particular play off, actually.
I'd agree. Jahmyr Gibbs, he had 2 massive fantasy point, real NFL type performances without David Montgomery. David Montgomery returns, and you know what? Jahmyr Gibbs kept the job. A bit surprising, but you know what? We adjust. He kept the job. Which running backs do you confidently want over Jahmyr Gibbs? I'm going to throw out Christian McCaffrey, Austin Eckler, Alvin Kamara. Is there any other running back you'd confidently take in fantasy football ahead of Jahmyr Gibbs at this point?
I'd rather have Jonathan Taylor, especially because of their late season schedule, but anyone else would be a decision at this point for me, which is, I'm surprised that I'm even saying that.
Yeah, I think I'm going to have Travis Etienne ahead of him rest of season, purely because Gibbs does have Montgomery in that backfield.
That's fair.
I think I might have him over Devon Achane at this point, though, simply because I think Achane's going to have some capped touch ceiling like Gibbs. And I'm a little bit more concerned about Raheem Mostert plus a Jeff Wilson who keeps getting healthier. That's going to be a decision point for me. Do you have a lean there? Because I think right now I'm leaning Gibbs over Achane, as crazy as that is.
I think I would too, and I don't feel very good about it, but I wouldn't feel good about it if I said it the other way too. So I think that's literally like a stalemate decision. So I think that's probably the line.
I like it. Let's talk about DeAndre Swift. People just haven't talked about him recently. He hasn't had the big rushing performances. I think he's teed up for a big game against Kansas City. Kansas City has been a true run funnel defense this year. And then DeAndre Swift in the fantasy playoffs gets the Giants in week 16 and the Cardinals in week 17. I know Swift hasn't had the big rushing numbers, but since week 5, he's had 15 carries a game, 1 goal line carry per game, not just 15 carries, but 4.8 targets per game. He's basically getting 20 opportunities per game in a top 3 offense. Kenny Gainwell during this stretch has had 6 touches per game. No other Philly running back's been above 3 touches per game during this stretch. We like the Eagles' rest of season schedule. DeAndre Swift is the clear bell cow in this backfield. I think he gets right this week, and I think he's someone that I would try to buy up at the trade deadline.
Yeah, I agree with you there. To give you guys a real world example, I have a team with CMC, Kamara, Swift, and now Jalen Warren. So what I'm going to handle this is Swift gets the nod in the flex every week. Jalen Warren, when they play the 49ers, for instance, I'm going to play Jalen Warren regardless of who the Eagles or who the Steelers are playing. But otherwise, I'm with you. I think Swift's like a top 16 running back going forward with some pretty big spike week potential late in the season.
We've been positive. It's time to talk about some fallers. Before we do, not only does Ryan have stuff on the site, the33rdteam.com on Monday and Tuesday, but he also has his expert picks and predictions that show up on Thursdays. And he lets you know what he's betting on in each game on Saturdays. The two of us have the fantasy and betting show that we co-host on Mondays and Thursdays. We do waivers on Tuesdays, and on Fridays, we're joined by our data scientist, Ben Wolby, for the Player Prop Happy Hour. Ryan is a busy, busy man. It is worth hearing, reading all of his thoughts each week. Fallers. Trevor Lawrence. Is he just a middling upside streamer moving forward? We haven't had a 20 fantasy point game out of him. He's had 2 games with 2 passing touchdowns. He's had 2 games with no passing touchdowns. The rest he had 1. He's been over 241 passing yards in just a third of his games this year. I think Sam Howell, Josh Dobbs, Brock Purdy, Dak Prescott, these are all quarterbacks I want ahead of Lawrence rest of season and pretty much every other week, just in general, unless there's some crazy matchup disparity. How should we view Lawrence going forward? Is he just a streamer, or is there more hope with the Titans on tap this week?
I definitely think he's just a streamer now. You can't plug him and play him every week. You know, if you have Josh Dobbs and Trevor Lawrence, I think you're in a good situation. But I do think big time ceiling is coming this week against the Titans. So depending on who you have, there's teams where I'd start Trevor Lawrence against Tennessee this week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we talked pre-show. I think he's going to be in my DFS player pool this week against the Titans. Everyone hates him, but I think we should adjust for fantasy streamer. Chuba Hubbard's lost the stranglehold on the workhorse running back duties. He outcarried Miles Sanders 9-2. Miles Sanders had negative rushing yards, but that kind of masked that the snaps were 27-23, barely in Chuba's favor. Miles Sanders actually ran more routes. This feels like it's starting to become some type of committee again, which is kind of why we weren't too gung-ho about just giving the reins to Chuba and proclaiming him as this fantasy RB2 rest of season. What are you thinking against Dallas this week? This feels like the week where we could see the full committee back against a very, very good run defense.
Yeah, what's interesting to me about this is I think this is more of a passing game opportunity for Panthers running backs to try to mitigate Dallas's pass rush. So I'd say Hubbard's generally more reliable in that phase. But long term, yeah, I mean, it makes more sense to me that this is a near 50-50 split. That's probably how it should be.
Yeah, the Miles Sanders contract is huge. It really just doesn't make sense that they'd phase him out when I think Chuba's been better than him, but how much better? It's not like Chuba's some massive difference maker in his own right. And then the last one, this is the most painful one. I rode this guy early in the season to many fantasy victories. But now, the past 3 games, this receiver, after being a top 12 receiver early in the season, the last 3 weeks with a new quarterback, he's averaging 2.7 targets, under 2 catches, and 26 yards per game. Talking about Jacoby Myers. Is Jacoby Myers droppable? Devontae Adams has 3.5 times as many targets a game the past 3 weeks. Michael Mayer's had more targets these last 3 weeks. Hunter Renfrow has the same amount of targets as Jacoby Myers these past 3 weeks. It looks pretty bleak without Jimmy Garoppolo. I don't think they're really trying to go back to him anytime soon. If I'm in need of some wins this week, and there's a guy I like on waivers, can I drop Jacoby Myers?
I mean, I'd drop Myers for Noah Brown without a second thought right now. I'd probably drop him from Brandon Cooks too. You know, like you said, as long as Aiden O'Connell's the quarterback, we're looking at volatility. If Jimmy Garoppolo returns, he's at least like a flex viable play in that scenario. But no, I don't really want to play him going forward.
Same. Let's talk about quarterback streamers. A little more optimism here. Guys we think could have big weeks that are ranked a little lower in the rankings. Matthew Stafford gets the Seahawks. Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua have identical 33% target shares on the field together this year. A lot of people have said Puka Nacua is a massive sell. The fantasy points haven't been there with Kupp. Then you look and they have the same amount of targets. I think that's very good for Matthew Stafford. Coming off the bye, probably a pretty functional offense. Seahawks have been beaten this year many times through the air. How are you viewing Stafford's floor and ceiling in this one?
The Rams, they blew out the Seahawks on opening day, and they've given the Seahawks fits for years. So I like Stafford in this matchup. And to the Puka point, like I think this is more along the lines of who he really is. Like the volume's interesting. He's not really a dynamic player. He's just a good, solid, reliable guy. And Stafford's getting a ton of production out of him.
Russell Wilson gets the Vikings. Russ is averaging 2 passing touchdowns a game this year, more than 18 fantasy points per game overall. Every single week he's in the streaming conversation. Vikings have been a much better defense the past month and a half, but I still think Russ can get it done for your fantasy teams.
Yeah, this is an interesting game. I think it's probably going to veer around 40 total points, 44 total points, somewhere in there. So the yardage is concerning at this point, but Russell Wilson's actually playing reasonably well to a degree. So I'd rather play Stafford, but he'd at least be among my considerations this week as a streamer.
Yeah, I'm going to give a spoiler alert. In my fantasy rankings, I have Stafford quarterback 18 this week, Russ quarterback 19, and then the last guy, Jordan Love, quarterback 20. He gets the Chargers. They're allowing a league high 315 passing yards per game. Overall, the Chargers have allowed 21 fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. To quote JJ Zacharyson, who did this research, he found that quarterbacks against the Chargers have scored 4 more fantasy points in those games than their season average, which is number 1 among these fantasy defenses. So I think Jordan Love, the floor and ceiling should be pretty elevated in this matchup.
Yeah, I think I'd rather actually roll the dice on Love over Russell Wilson, given the matchups. Love hasn't been productive in about 6 weeks now for the most part. The Packers offense has really struggled, but he has had some moments as like a general quarterback. So if he's gonna have a spike week, I think this is the spot for it.
Let's just dive into tight end streamers on the Packers. Luke Musgrave. The floor is pretty low. We've seen that this year, but I think the bet on Musgrave is you bet on a speedy rookie who's running all the routes facing a beatable Chargers defense.
Yeah, I mean, if we're going to play Jordan Love, we have to play Luke Musgrave, right? Long term, don't have a ton of faith in the offense, but young guy. They're in a rebuilding team, so good matchup too this week.
We've talked a lot about what could have been with the Jets and Aaron Rodgers. Ryan, what could have been our late round tight end darling, Tyler Conklin, still has not scored a touchdown. I can pretty much guarantee that if Aaron Rodgers was his quarterback, he'd at least have 3 on the season. Conklin's had at least 5 targets, 6 of his past 8 games. Buffalo's defense has struggled the past month and a half. Conklin just had 7 catches for 70 yards this past week. I think he's going to have a little bit of a higher floor where Musgrave has a little bit more of the ceiling for the streamers this week.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Even though they've been very ineffective, the Jets continue to be very pass-centric. They're trying to make Zach Wilson beat people from the pocket, which is, probably should cost some people their jobs at this point. But, Tyler Conklin, they're going to probably be playing from behind. I got to imagine Buffalo's going to come out firing in this game. So negative gain script potentially, solid floor, like you said.
Before we finish with our rapid-fire defensive streamers, reminder to follow Ryan at Ryan Reynolds NFL on Twitter. All his works on the33rdteam.com. Power rankings, survivor thoughts, what he's betting on, picks and predictions for every game, game previews for the Island games. Make sure to check that out. I know I am going to be particularly interested to hear his thoughts on the Super Bowl rematch because Monday night we get Eagles at Chiefs. He's going to have a full article on that one, and that's going to be must read and must watch as a game. My fantasy rankings will hit the site within the next couple hours. And my rest of season rankings and trade value chart will hit the site tomorrow. Let's talk about defensive streamers. Ryan, we have 5 good options this week. The Dolphins get Aiden O'Connell's Raiders.
Yeah, I mean, that's generally the thing. Like, I want to bet on Vic Fangio against a quarterback like Aiden O'Connell. I think the Dolphins going to smash Vegas. Positive game script all game, sacks, turnovers. If the Dolphins scored more than 20 fantasy points this week, it wouldn't surprise me.
The Detroit Lions get Justin Fields in his return to NFL action after nearly a month and a half away from the sport.
I think the Bears are a sneaky, interesting underdog this week, so that gives me some pause with the Lions defense. But after the Chargers tore them up last week, probably a correction spot for them, and they're 10-point home favorites right now.
What's funny is this might be the NFL's worst defense right now, the Washington Commanders. Fortunately, they get, as you've said, the worst offense in recent memory in the Giants. It seems like we both kind of think that Tommy DeVito will not be able to capitalize on this Commanders defense.
Yeah, it's basically, I want nothing to do with the Commanders defense apart from their defensive tackle duo, but this is a bet against Tommy DeVito. I mean, it's hard to watch Giants football right now. It sincerely is.
The Jaguars get the Titans after the 4-touchdown performance, which you and I were both very skeptical of. Will Levis has come back down to earth. He looks like a liability. I'm not saying that there's no long-term future for him with the Titans, but at least the rest of this season, would you say that we can pretty comfortably just stream defenses against Will Levis's Titans?
Yeah, for the most part, you have a rookie quarterback that was taken in the second round behind a bottom 10 at absolute best offensive line. Any team that has a real pass rush, I'm interested in playing the Titans. And from the Jaguar standpoint, if Trevor Lawrence has a spike week, talking about positive game script for Jacksonville, lots of sacks and turnover opportunities for the Jaguars.
And then the last one is you like the Broncos this week as a fringe top 12 option. They've played better recent weeks. It seems like you're willing to bet on them against Josh Dobbs.
Yeah, I can go either way on this. Like, if you want to play the Vikings defense over Denver, I don't really have a problem with it. But, Denver's a unique place to play with the altitude, outdoor game for a dome team. Secondary has been very good this year, and the Vikings don't really have a great running game to exploit Denver's one weakness. So I could see a couple turnovers in this one.
Mm-hmm. As someone who lives in Denver, I can confirm that when I first moved here, the altitude was a problem. And I'm 165 pounds. When you're 250, 300 pounds, I can only imagine how difficult it is to get the blood pumping, the oxygen flowing to your entire big body. Folks, that's how the show will end. This was the Week 11 Waiver Show. I'm Josh Larky. He's Ryan Reynolds. We work for the 33rd team. Thank you, everyone.